Sandra, I've had the privilege of working with you for a couple years now, and I can't overstate how transformative it's been for me. You've guided me in not just understanding my emotions, but helping navigate deeper connections with myself, my relationships, my spirituality. And I'm just really grateful to have you here today. For those of you that don't know, Sandra Morse is a communications teacher with decades of experience in helping people uncover the truth about themselves and their relationships. She has a special gift for guiding people in deeper connections and understanding. Her work has been profound in shaping my own journey, and I'm really excited to share her wisdom with you today. Sandra, I love to start by having you explain what it means to be a communication teacher and a little bit more about yourself and how it's helped shape your approach with helping people.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. I tell people I come by it honestly because I'm the eighth born of 12 children. My parents had 12 children in 15 years, and I was born in a sea of people. So I have a natural, lifelong relationship with people. And it just seems I was always curious about how come people respond the way they respond. So that curiosity from a young age led me to where I am today. And thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So, as far as communication is concerned, why do you think it's the main foundation in helping us understand ourselves and forming relationships with people?
Because the way you talk, and unless you take a vow of silence, you're talking every day, every day, every day, shapes your reality. Perception dictates reality, and communicating and listening is central to perception. So the fastest way to change your life is to change the way you talk. But before you change it, best to understand it. Language is very finite. There's only so many things you can do. So best to learn about it as soon as possible. And when you learn to communicate, represent yourself, when you learn to listen, you just feel better about who you are. You like who you're becoming when you understand that the way you speak impacts you first and other people second.
That's beautiful. I like that. How do you think people begin to understand how to better communicate?
Well, all problems are communication problems as far as I'm concerned, right? And people recognize early on that they need to learn how to communicate. You know, when people represent themselves, they feel better about themselves. And when people are having trouble, most people in the communication, when you're looking at communication and you acknowledge that something's broken down, something's not right, you know, it's the source of a lot of confidence or self-doubt or questioning. When you don't know how to represent yourself, you either are open up to curiosity about it or you become very critical of yourself. You have those two choices in life. Are you going to be open and curious or shut down and negative? You know, like which way are you going to go? And whichever way you go, your practice becomes a practice. So if you have a commitment to stay open and be curious and wonder about what's possible in the way you represent yourself, then like a whole nother field of possibility opens up. But if you're resentful or resigned and don't think it's ever going to get any better and you're a closed system, that's also its own field of possibility. So like whichever way you go is how it goes.
What do you think is the difference between people who are open and the people who are closed down, right? Like, you know, is there a missing piece for people who are closed down? Like what do you think, or is there even a common cause with disconnection?
Well, I mean, we all open and close and open and close and open and close, but I think it all starts with education. I mean, if people were better educated as to what it means to be human, we would be better. You know, we would all do better if we had the right tools. And so to stay open is a committed practice, to understand that it's my privilege as a human being to stay open. It's a privilege. And with that openness comes a set of practices. We inadvertently become closed because we are practicing things that being critical, being judgmental, you know, being righteous are all indications of a closed system. And not that a closed system is closed all the time, because it does open up every time you experience love or you love, you open up. But to have a committed practice to stay open is another matter.
Those practices that you mentioned, obviously, it's not something that we have right from beginning of life. That those are practices probably we have to learn from later on in life. If you're lucky enough to have you as a communications teacher, or things that maybe you pick up on from early in age, is there something that you see with people that like sprouts that in them to want to begin that journey, or is it just by luck? Like, is there anything you think that people develop to want to bring them closer to start understanding how to be open?
Well, I mean, a bird's nature is to fly, a fish's nature is to swim. Our nature, human beings' nature, is to learn, to grow, and to heal. I mean, my body knows how to heal itself. Mm-hmm. I, at 66, didn't set out to become who I am. I learned in the course of life, and in learning and being open and curious, I've become who I am. And so that curiosity and that learning is in all of us. It's our nature. And depending upon what we're practicing, so, if I'm practicing love, if I'm practicing kindness, if I'm practicing forgiveness, acceptance, trust, if I'm practicing, then those practices determine what's possible for me as human beings, because we're human, cultivated ways of being. I be based upon what I'm practicing. So our beingness is a result of our practice. And, there's a lot of wonderful ways to practice. Central to all the practices is the way you talk. Yeah.
Okay. I've heard you mentioned love a couple times, and you shared, a really nice concept that I love that sticks out often to me with my friendships, my relationships with family. And I think about it often. You told me at the very beginning of us working together, as you said, the hardest thing in life is to love and be loved. Mm-hmm. So would you talk a little bit about what that concept, what it means, and how you developed it?
Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to back up and just say that we live in a divorce culture. A lot of people, 60% of everybody comes from a broken family, a divorced family. So to back up, to say that to be in a relationship with another human being is not about love, it's about commitment. So in order for me to know myself, I need you to see for me that which I cannot see for myself. My eyes are not for me, they're for you. So when I started my journey with my husband 42 years ago, called marriage, it really became a spiritual practice called marriage. So I think that marriage is a spiritual practice where you practice love. You can't just practice love. You have to practice love and forgiveness and acceptance and trust. So love becomes a central part of the spiritual practice in a committed relationship. And those committed relationships aren't just relegated to marriage. Like, you have a committed relationship with your staff, right? Mm-hmm. Most work environments, I always think the best place to learn about where to be human is in the work environment, because you can teach people how to speak to each other in a way that is satisfying, makes people, want to be there, what makes people want to rise to the occasion. Because if people are taught and they understand, like, for example, like a complaint is, is not so great. Mm-hmm. Many people live in an environment where complaining is just a given. But if you stop complaining and you start asking for what you want, now you're in another field, because a complaint is just a covert request, right? So I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but
yes. Yeah. So you developed the concept of the hardest thing in life is to love and be loved.
Yeah. The hardest thing is to love and to be loved, because in order for me to love you, I have to accept you. In order for me to accept you, I have to accept myself. Mm-hmm. In order for me to love you, I have to be an open system. I have to be willing to stay open to the way I impact you, to the way my moods impact you, to the way my words impact you, to the way my way of being impacts you. And then I have to be willing to course correct. I have to be willing to say, I'm sorry. for that. I didn't mean to impact you negatively that way. Pull it back, apologize, and then keep becoming who I want to be in relationship to you by taking full responsibility for myself and the impact I have on you and practicing love and kindness every day. And it's not possible to practice it every day because we're human beings, but it is possible to become a much better observer of yourself so that you can take responsibility for yourself and become who you want to be with all of your perfections and your imperfections, recognizing that we're only human and we're all going to die. So how are we going to get to dead? And who do we want to be between now and then? It's a pretty good question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the concept. I can relate to it because I think there's people who struggle with knowing how to give love. And there's also people that struggle with knowing how to receive love, right?
But wait a minute. We all have that struggle. Like there's nobody who doesn't struggle with that. We all struggle with it. The only difference between me and someone who's not practicing is just the awareness that I benefit from that practice, and someone who hasn't come to the awareness yet that they would benefit from the practice of love and being loved. And plus, we live in a very oppositional time. Like for what? Tick, 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 life keeps going by, pay attention. It's not so life-enhancing to practice being angry or righteous. It's not so life-enhancing to have enemies, to tell you the truth. It just doesn't enhance life.
Yeah.
So if you want to get on a life-enhancing path and enjoy the privilege of being human, like change the channel. Start loving, start being kind, and see how life responds to you then.
Yeah, I think once people do start to understand that, it allows for them to love more and to receive love more, right? Once they understand.
Yeah. And then you practice it. And some days they're easier to practice than others.
Yeah. And that comes with something you've taught me, right? With being disconnected from yourself.
Yeah.
And being connected to yourself. One of the things I talk about with my friends is, or something that like it's a scenario that I'll present to them is like, hey, if you can just be accountable for your wrong in the situation, it quickly disarms the other person, right? So if you and I are in an argument and I come to you and I'm like, you may be expecting me to say, you did this, you did that, you did that. And so you have your guns up ready to fire back. Mm-hmm. Opposed to if I come to you and I say, hey, Sandra, you know what? I realized what I said to you in that moment was, wrong or is out of place, or I didn't like who I was in that moment. Those guns that you had up, they're ready to fire. You now put them down, you're disarmed, and you're ready to have a more open, flowing connection.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the biggest pieces is being accountable.
Yeah.
And learning how to love people the right way.
So one of the things that's easy to learn, but that it requires some attention, you have to observe and pay attention, is that a reaction always begets an equal and opposing reaction. So if I'm reacting to you, which is what you're talking about,
mm-hmm.
if I'm reacting to you, like if we're out in the world and we're reacting, we see it, in restaurants or people who are upset about something. A reaction calls forth an equal and opposing reaction. It's automatic. When you learn to not react and to respond, it's very disarming, like you said. But it takes some awareness to recognize that reacting, you're never going to benefit from it. It just isn't, there's no benefit to reacting. It only really leads to having you feel worse about yourself, ultimately. But when you learn to respond, even if someone's reacting to you, the keys to the kingdom lie in the response mechanism. So always the power lies, and we heard this in every important book we've ever read. It's not what happens to you. It's what you do to what happens to you, mm-hmm. that the power lies. The keys to the kingdom are buried in the response mechanism. So if you want to have a better life, pay super close attention to how you respond all the time, all the time, all the time. And it doesn't even have to be authentic. It doesn't even have to, you could be feeling, you could be in a bad mood and still be kind, even though you might not, your head might tell you don't feel like being kind, but you still respond kindly, and it provides the opportunity for you to shift your mood. So how you respond determines what's possible.
You said something interesting there that I've noticed personally about myself is there may be times when like I want to respond differently, but every time you choose to respond with kindness, I think, and you'll be able to speak more to this, but I think every time you choose to respond positively, it rewires something in you. It's almost like it changes who how you will be in the future if you continue to practice that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I've noticed that about myself, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah. So one time I challenged myself to smile every day for
You
6 weeks. I told
you challenged me. You've actually told me, hey, I want you to just smile while you're driving the whole time.
Right.
I just laugh about it.
That's right. I mean, it sounds trite, but first of all, it's powerful. Second of all, it's hard. Those facial muscles get a workout. And the other thing is mind changing. Smiling as a practice changes your mind.
So you said that you challenge yourself to do that. What does it change for you? How has it made you feel? What effect has it had on you?
It's easier for me to see beauty in the world when I smile, because your eyes are informed by what goes on in your head. So your eyes go looking for whatever you tell them to see. So pay attention. And when you smile, you automatically have an internal information system that's just easier to see beauty in the world when you're smiling. Give it a try. Give it a try.
Yeah,
I would challenge your audience to give it a try and let me know and then, you just do like an informal study and just give some feedback as to how their world changed just by the practice of smiling.
I love that. Yeah, you did challenge me to do that. And I just laughed at the thought of like driving down the road, smiling, but it truly does make a difference in how you show up in the world and actually how you feel about yourself and other people that you come in contact with.
And then try being in a really, really bad mood, because we all get into really bad moods, and then just slap a smile on it and see what happens. I mean, just give it a try.
Yeah, I think someone who's been very reactive in the past, and how easy it is to slip down those patterns. Once you come to the other side and you see how you choose to use your energy, I could show up and I could react negatively, or I could show up and choose my energy to react positively. You're able to see how much better it is when you choose to use your energy that way, as opposed to just reacting and yelling, whatever you want to do. Right?
There have been studies that show that literally when you respond, it expands your peripheral vision. And when you react, it shrinks. So you don't even, the more reactive you are, the more angry you are, the less you see. So that's precarious, because when you're angry, you want to proceed with caution, because that's when you're most vulnerable in a certain way. So, take care.
Yeah, something you've told me, which is going to segue us into the next thing I want to bring up, is that as far as emotions, it's easier to be angry than it is to be sad. Yeah. And so,
because anger requires very little of you, and sadness requires that you tend to yourself.
And so one of the things that you've told me is that, how much we struggle to be with our emotions, right? I think about the concept in our sessions when you go, can you be with this? Can you be with that? Can you be with this? Can you be with that? And I mean, why do you think we struggle to sit with our feelings so much?
Well, I think that we live in a concept-driven reality. I think we like the idea of life more than life itself. So you have to decide, first of all, where are you going to put your value? Is it based on your experience or on the idea of how it should be? So when you start to understand that life is for experiencing, what's central to our life experience are our emotions. And emotions are just energy in motion. There's not a lot of there if you don't add a big story to it. So, if you hurt my feelings, then I go, oh my God, Matt hurt my feelings. How can you believe that son of a bitch? And all of that narrative takes me away from my own experience. If you hurt my feelings and I shut my mouth and I be present to what I'm experiencing, it just doesn't last that long. But the story about it is what keeps us imprisoned. So when you're present to all your emotions, right, then something changes for you just in terms of your own relationship with yourself, your intuitive body, your ability to be present. You could take in more life. But so many of us in kind of this media driven, telephone, Instagram kind of Facebook driven reality, we have the idea of what everybody's taking photos of their perfect moment, right? It's an illusion that life is like that. It's not the idea of life. It's the experience of life. And life is consistent because if you miss that moment, don't worry, it'll give you another one. I always tell people we're on the moving sidewalk of life. And if you miss that moment, it'll show up further along the moving sidewalk, That's why whatever doesn't get worked out in the first divorce is waiting for you in the second marriage. Whatever doesn't get worked out in the second marriage is waiting for you in the third one. It's all you. And the question is, can you be with yourself? Can you be with your emotions? Can you trust that you have what it takes to get where you need to go?
All really great information. You shared with me, and I don't remember the exact time frame, but you said the longest we feel our emotion for is a certain amount of time. Was it 15 seconds, 30 seconds?
Well, they say the average life of an emotion is 2 minutes, right?
2 minutes.
Obviously, grief, no one's going to go home without, by that home, I mean, no one's going to die without losing everything they love, including the beating of their own heart, right? Grief is a part of life. Grief is the flip side of love. The more you love somebody or something, the more intense the grief. So grief has its way with you. So there are certain emotions that are, going to have their way with you, grief being one of them. But like most emotions are, the average life of an emotion is like 2 minutes. The more you add your story to it, the longer it takes, right? Some emotions are harder, like disappointment, right? Because you're going to ask me about disappointment. You know why? We've hijacked disappointment as a culture and put it as the one emotion of how dare you, So why disappointment has taken up so much of our bandwidth? Because most people have a hard time negotiating disappointment. And so it's a curiosity to me. And it's also one of those emotions where just let yourself be disappointed. Like you're not going to die from disappointment. It's okay. You could be disappointed. You got what it takes. Let disappointment occupy you. Won't be very long, but make it less. Make it less.
Do you think disappointment comes from setting expectations? We all set expectations, and there's a lot of suffering that comes from setting expectations.
Yeah. Expectations set you up to be upset. But I think disappointment comes from that concept-driven reality, like somehow or another your worth is associated with what you have. Your worth is associated with what you look like, what you do. I think we've scrambled it. And if we told the truth about it culturally, we really told the truth about it, that, we also have a caste system in the United States. And I think because of that, disappointment is, has its own legs because it's completely tied up into the concept-driven reality.
Why do you think, and I know you talked a little bit about, but why do you think, and I don't think people even realize this, but why do you think we fear disappointment so much?
Because because of what we think it says about us.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What's a practice, or what would you say to someone who, how can someone learn to face disappointment instead of avoiding it?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't put disappointment there. I would just say, If your everyday practice was to open to all your emotions, that's all you need. If you could just open to all your emotions, I think I've shared this quote with you from Pema Chodron. I love this quote. If your everyday practice is to open to all your emotions, to all the people you meet and all the situations you encounter without closing down and trusting that you can do that, then that will take you as far as you could go. And then you will understand all the teachings anyone has ever taught.
Mm.
I think that Pema Chodron, that's a big statement.
That's huge.
It's huge. Like if your everyday practice is to open to all your emotions, I say stay current, add nothing. Just stay current to your emotions. Don't add a big story. Just stay current right here, right now. The past is gone. It's never coming back. The future never really arrives. All we have is right here, right now. The big moment comes when someone has the courage to tell you. Let me say that over again. So the big moment comes when someone has the courage to tell you, hey, Matt, this is it. Right now, right here, right now. It's as good as it's ever going to get. Right now. Right now, you and I sitting here talking together, this is as good as it's ever going to get. So think about that. Because all we have is right here, right now. So what are you going to do? How are you going to play? How do you want to be? We're human beings. How do you want to be? Right here, right now. This is it. Right? So stay current. Because this is it. Because no kidding. This is it.
Why do you think it's so hard? You mentioned staying current, which leads to being present, right?
Yeah.
Why? And I think emotions ties into this, right? Because for myself, when I've learned to try to be as present as I possibly can, I may be feeling sad or I may be feeling happy, and that may be pulling me away. Why do you think that it's so hard for a lot of people to be present? Majority of us to honestly be present.
I think because people don't trust it. I think people have a hard time. When depression comes knocking at my door, I answer it. I invite it in. I'm 66 years old. What am I going to do? Pretend like it's not there? I mean, everybody has moments of all of it. Depression, anxiety, like everybody. We're humans, right? We cycle through our emotions. And when it comes knocking at the door, let it in. Like whatever's there, have the courage to sit up and let it in. Let yourself be present to whatever life wants from you. Life is very generous. All it does is leave you with more of yourself. And the more of yourself you have access to, the better your life is. The greater your life force energy is, more life can come to you. So, being able to feel your feelings really is helpful in terms of creating more life force energy.
Feel your feelings. That's another great concept and something I've learned with you, that I don't know if people really grasp the concept for that. What's a practice you think people could take away to truly understand what feel your feelings really means?
Well, I think one of the great privileges of being human is that we have the capacity to observe ourselves. Judging is not observing. We all have the internal critic, right? We all have the ongoing, always conversation in our head of being less than, not being worthy, being worried about whether we belong or not belong. We all have that internal. We're all the same. When you start to observe yourself, when you start to become a better observer, now you have a skill that's really helpful. Being able to observe yourself without judging yourself puts you on a certain path. And so I would just invite people to become better observers. I always start my work with all of my students, teaching them how to be a better observer. Pay attention to your moods. Pay attention to the way you respond. Pay attention to what goes on in your head and to what end. What's going on? What's happening over there? So start to pay attention. Be curious about it, not judgmental.
Yeah, that was one of the first, again, it just brings me back to the beginning of us working together. And that was one of the first things you taught me. Observe yourself without judging. And I was like, okay, well, what does that mean? So in those moments, I would be like, okay, I'm mad, but it's okay that you're mad. You just have the ability to choose who you want to be in this moment. How do you respond? You don't have to, talk negatively on yourself because you're mad. You just say, I'm mad. And you just be with it, feel your feelings, and it allows you to move through it, but it takes a lot of practice.
Takes awareness.
Awareness.
Takes some awareness. Just takes. And like you're not mad for no reason. You're mad for a reason. And then the question is, can you understand it long enough to drop being mad and pick up the ability to represent yourself? And therein lies some vulnerability. Therein lies what it means to be vulnerable, because, as far as I can see, every time you're vulnerable, it's hard. It requires a certain kind of exposure. And vulnerability is the one act that you never get good at. You never really get good at. I mean, I could get good at, I might be able to get good at in my relationship with you to say, oh, you hurt my feelings. But anytime I go to represent myself that way, I expose myself a little bit. And it is in that exposure that the vulnerability lies. But we're mixed up about vulnerability because it's actually a source of strength, not weakness. People think vulnerability is a weakness, and oh no, no.
Yeah, you I remember we were having a conversation one time, and I was telling you, like, yeah, I'm okay with talking about my feelings. I don't know if you remember that conversation. You said, no, that's not vulnerability. Do you remember what you told me vulnerability is?
Tell me.
So you told me, you said, vulnerability is being uncomfortable with saying uncomfortable things.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I think for me, that switched everything, because I thought I was the most vulnerable person on earth, right? I could get up here and say, I don't like the way that whatever you said, it hurt my feelings or whatever. And you're like, no, that's not it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why do you feel, or why do you think people have a hard time being vulnerable? Like, obviously they're exposing themselves, but
yeah. And we don't live in a culture that promotes that. We just don't. And so, and people are afraid of the unknown, the uncertainty, what might happen here. A lot of people are afraid of not looking good. People have a lot of stock in looking good.
yeah,
right?
They want to cover up.
Yeah,
flaws.
and there's not a lot of value in looking good. There's a lot of value in cultivating an authentic, open, loving, kind heart. But looking good's a whole nother thing.
Right. So you've worked with married couples. I mean, you specialize in that, right? And
Well, I love that.
You love that. That's one of the things you're very passionate about.
Yeah.
What role do you think intimate or vulnerability plays in building and repairing intimacy in relationships?
Oh, it's essential. It's essential to be vulnerable. It's essential to learn how to have hard conversations. It takes a long time in relationship, in two people's relationship with each other, to really trust that you can expose yourself at the deepest level. I mean, it's a road, when you commit to another human being, you commit to exploring your own self, and having that other person bear witness to it is a real privilege. And it's not easy, super rewarding, but not easy. And the older you get, the more imperative it becomes to really dive down deep and tell the truth about yourself in many different domains of your life.
What's the most common unspoken fear that you see between couples?
Unspoken fear. Well, I see one of the most damaging is when people negotiate in their partnership with each other by withholding themselves. So when people use withholding as a tool, it's very damaging. And when you can be upright enough to just bring yourself fully to the other person without withholding yourself, it's a game changer. But most people don't recognize that they negotiate in their relationship by withholding themselves. And so that is a game changer. But it takes a moment to be able to say, what's happening here is you got mad, so you withheld yourself. You got mad, so you withheld yourself. I'm not talking to you. I'm not relating to you. I'm removing myself, either physically or emotionally. It's so detrimental to negotiate by withholding.
Man, that's interesting. I know that's something I've definitely done myself, Why do you think that's what we automatically go to? Is that something that comes from childhood? Is that our interactions? Because it's a common practice, right? Like
Yeah.
I've done it. I've had it done to me. Like why do you think that's just like the automatic go to?
I just don't find the question why very helpful.
Got it.
I just don't. I mean, why? You were born into an already existing conversation. It was already happening. I mean, one of the bitter moments in my life was when I recognized I was negotiating with my husband by withholding myself. And I certainly course corrected, but not in enough time that I role modeled it to my kids. So then you watch your children negotiate with you by withholding themselves like it's a bitter pill, right? So were you born into it? Was it role modeled? Was it, why? I don't know. I have theories about it, but I just don't find it very helpful.
Do you think it's a defense mechanism thing? Like,
Yep.
hey, you've hurt me,
Yep.
and now I want to hurt you by
Yep.
removing myself from
For
it.
sure. For sure.
Yeah, I think
It's defense. It's a way to protect yourself. It's righteous. It's a way to be right. I'm right, you're wrong. So therefore I'm out of here. Like it's all kinds of things all in one. Yeah. But mostly it's a practice. Mostly. Why do people do it? Because they practice doing it. Like that's the most honest answer. Why do I do it? Well, I did it because I practiced doing it. It became so second nature to me that I was withholding myself before I even knew it. It takes a while, I think, to wake up to it. And then it's so gross because then I have to take responsibility for the impact that's had on my husband. I mean, it's just not very gracious to withhold yourself from someone you say you love.
right. What do you think it means to truly be seen by someone else? And people who don't know, how can people create that space for someone?
I think it starts with just loving yourself, right? It starts with, okay, recognizing that life's a privilege and that, you love being here. I love being here. I love the beating of my own heart. I love the privilege of being here, like it changes when death lets you know, I'm coming for you. You get sick, something happens. People change when they recognize and remember they're going to die. So I think it starts with the more I can accept myself, forgive myself, appreciate myself, love my life, love who I am, who I have to contribute, then that becomes an invitation for me to also love you and accept you for who you are and who you're not. Like, okay, like I am who I am but also who I'm not, So all of the privilege of being in relationship with another human being starts with oneself and emanates out from yourself to the other. But you got to have someone over there that's committed to letting you figure yourself out. You got to have someone over there who's committed. I mean, my husband has not been in love with me every moment of the 42 years we've been married. That is for sure, right? But he is a committed, willing participant. And we've both recognized the value of walking through life together and who we are for each other and having eyes on each other and really appreciating the space we give each other to figure it out because, we're going to die unresolved. In case anybody hasn't told you, you're going to die unresolved. And so best to get on the path as soon as you can, really loving who you're becoming, because that's what matters, who you're becoming, not who you were, but who you're becoming.
And your partner has to be able to see that, right?
Your partner better be on the same path also, that they also love who they're becoming.
Mm. Yeah, I think that theory is what essentially creates safety in relationships. You allow your partner the space to make those mistakes as they continue to grow into who they're becoming. And you still show up for them.
Mm-hmm.
You still love them, right?
Yeah. Starting with your own imperfection. It's easy to forgive your partner when you recognize you too make the same mistakes. I always kind of crack up quietly because, like when couples come to see me, whatever complaint he has about her is exactly the same complaint she has about him. They're the same. They're the same. They're the same. I have this theory that you can only be attracted to that which you are.
Mm. Why do you think that is?
because I think it's kind of our nature. And then when you become who you want to be, things start to shift. And the great privilege of life is that we have those options. We can become who we want to be at any given moment of now, right? You could change your mind anytime you like.
Mm-hmm. Um, Another thing I want to bring in is the word control.
Mm-hmm.
That's a heavy word, right? I've worked on that with you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's all over. It's within our relationships. It's within just how we move. I mean, you might get upset because someone cut you off. That's control, right? You couldn't control that situation. Why do you think control is so present in our lives, and why do so many of us struggle with control? A
Well,
big question.
I think I think that trust has been hijacked. I think we're misinformed about trust. I think that trust isn't earned, it's given.
Mm.
Just like love. Love isn't earned, it's given. I love you, not because you've earned my love, because it's a privilege for me to give it to you. I trust you, not because you've earned it, because it's a privilege for me to trust that you're a human being and only a human being, and human beings make mistakes. And I trust you're going to make mistakes. And I think the more you trust, the less need you have for control.
Mm.
And I think it's really trust is just control is a lack of trust. You could just whittle it down to, do you trust?
Do you think that how much of ego is tied into control? Do you think there's an element of that, or do you think those two things are
I
separate?
mean, I don't know. I don't know how to talk about ego. I generally don't. So, I mean, I think that trust is a cultivated practice, just like love is a cultivated practice, just like forgiveness and acceptance are cultivated practice. I accept myself and I accept you, and I accept that you spilled the milk, right? Not that I need to control you. Don't spill the milk. How dare you spill the milk? Oh my God, you spilled the milk. How could you spill the milk? I told you 100 times not to spill the milk. God, please don't spill the milk. I trust. Control would be don't spill the milk, and trust would be I trust that you're going to spill the milk, and I have what it takes to be with spilt milk, like that thing, like the same thing you said. Can you be with that? Can you be with that? Like, you take a look at your control issues and just ask the question, can I be with it? Can I be with it? Can I be with it? Yeah.
What do you think happens when we learn to let go of control? And how do you think it shifts our relationship with ourselves
No, I
and
think
others?
you have a lot more freedom when you have less control. You just have a lot of freedom. In the name of the game, the name of the game is for all of us. Like, I want Matt to be free to be Matt, 100% Matt. There's no other Matt except for you. I want you, I want to be free to be myself. I want to learn to be free to be myself. We really want people to learn to be free to be themselves, because we are each other's magic.
Mm.
Yeah. We are each other's magic. So I need you to be free to be yourself so that you can, spread your magic on me. Because right now we need a lot of magic.
We sure do. Um, you've talked to me about how we really don't know much in our 20s.
Not much.
We learn to meet ourselves in our 30s.
Yeah, 30s it's always a good time if you know what the time is good for.
Yep, another one of my favorite things that you say.
It's always good. The learning that happens in the 20s is very different than the learning that happens in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and 60s. And the thing that people don't tell you is that life just gets better and better and better and better and better, right? And there's things that you know in your 60s you'll never know in your 30s, right? Because of experiences. But there are things in the 30s that if you could figure out in the 30s, sure makes the 40s and 50s much better.
Yeah, you've told me like you really start living in your 50s, right?
Yeah, well, you're thrown out into the world in your 50s in a way that you're not in your 30s and 40s, in my assessment.
Right.
Yeah.
What do you think we're meant to discover about ourselves at these different stages?
In your 30s, you really want to learn to say what you mean and mean what you say. You really want your voice to represent you. You want to be able to learn to keep your word. You want to be able to, figure out what you care about and what you value in your 30s. What you care about, I have a daughter who's all concerned in her 30s about her 401k. Like, relax about money in your 30s, please. It's much better to cultivate different practices in your 30s, right? It's important to understand how to ask for what you want. It's important, to really start to cultivate a body of clarity for yourself in your 30s. Start to be a little more discerning in your 30s. Really keep your judgment in check in your 30s. Because when you can understand who you are, when you can begin to understand how to use your voice like a musical instrument in your 30s, makes the 40s much easier. You build, to be confident is to know that it's going to work out for you in the future. And the kind of confidence that comes from self-representation and authenticity is a real gift. And so then you move into your 40s and, you really want to figure out how to be stable in your 40s, how to have your emotional and your physical and your mental and your in the world. What does it mean for you to deepen your stability within your own self? And then you're good to offer yourself into the world in your 50s. You've earned the right to say, this is who I am, this is where I stand, this is what I care about, this way, because I've been practicing it for 2 decades. Very satisfying. Very satisfying. Yeah.
Is there a life stage that you found most challenging? 30s, 40s,
yeah.
50s?
I just find life challenging, period. Right. And the thing I do is I always pay close attention to the invitations that come my way. Who's extending what invitation? Pay attention to the invitations that come your way. Yeah. And so, I have found that life is challenging at different stages for different reasons. I found the 30s, I had children in my 30s, and that's its own kind of challenge. Yeah.
Julio shared something with me that I guess you talked to him about, and you told him, figure out why do we judge so hard in the 30s, or was it something along those lines? Yeah. What can you talk about that?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the most important aspects of language is the nature of assessment, which is why do you judge? And a lot of how you feed the internal critic is by how you judge. And for the sake of what? How come we're judging so hard? There's a direct relationship between the nature of assessment and how one suffers. So the more you judge for no reason, then the harder your life is. So if you can really pay attention to the nature of how you assess, one of the most important things I think in the 30s is to keep yourself in check about how you judge. What are you judging others for? What are you judging yourself for? And for the sake of what? If I go to the bank and they're going to assess me. If I go to the bank, say I want to buy a house, want to take out a mortgage, they're going to assess me. They're going to say, okay, you qualify for this amount of money. And they're going to assess me. They only care about one thing. What do they care about?
How much you got in your bank account or how much you make?
Yeah, 4. They only care about one thing. If I'm going to take out a loan, they only care about one thing.
Your credit score?
Am I going to pay you?
Oh, am I going to pay you back? Yeah.
They only care about, am I going to pay you back?
Yeah.
That's all they're going to take a risk based on all the way in which they assess me.
Yeah.
They only care about one thing. Am I going to pay you back? They don't care about how tall I am. They don't care about how much I weigh. They don't care whether I'm pretty or ugly. They don't care about my style. They only care about one thing. Am I going to pay you back? Right? And am I going to pay you back when? When do they care about when I'm going to pay them back?
Mm-hmm.
In the future. They care about, am I going to pay you back in the future? Right? So that's a known fact about being assessed, right?
Right.
If my child is in school and they get a grade in a D in reading, what does that say? It says the D in reading is an indication that he's not learning to read that's going to promote his advancement into the future, right? So when we get assessed, it's generally for the sake of the future. But when someone makes an assessment I don't know if I can use bad language.
Yeah, can.
Yeah, okay, good. If someone makes an assessment oh, she's a bitch,
right.
What is it for the sake of? or I'm a terrible person. What is it for the sake of? Or they don't know what they're talking about or whatever. When you start to understand how you assess, why you assess, for the sake of what, in your 30s, and you keep yourself in check, this is a good map to follow. It's a really good thing to pay attention to. Why you judge him for the sake of what?
Yeah, I think it changes your connection with people too.
Yeah, for sure.
And like you said, it allows you to be more open, because
Yeah,
the second you judge,
yeah,
you're doing this, right?
yeah. And by the way, we can feel it. When someone's judging me, I can feel it. And so can you. We're all receptive that way. We might not talk about it, but we are definitely receptive. If I walk into a room and someone's judging me, I can feel it.
Mm.
Negatively or
Right.
positively.
Right.
I can tell if someone likes me or not likes me just based upon how they look at me.
Where do you think judgment comes from? Is it is it insecurity?
It's kind of automatic. It's one of those things that I remember when your mother brought little Matt home in her arms, everybody was already talking around you. You were born into an already existing conversation. And if that familial narrative, if that narrative from the family is very judgmental, you're going to grow up very judgmental. So it's something that we're born into, but it's also something that we wake up to. Wow, it doesn't serve me to judge you for no reason, because like what I think of you is none of your business. Like what you think of me is none of my business. It says more about you than me. So if you have all these assessments of me, it's on you, not me. Unless I say, hey, I'm open to some feedback here. Can you see for me that which I cannot see for myself? Then now we're in a different ballgame.
Okay. So this brings me to one of my favorite moments of our show. It's called the wiggle room, right? So I'd like for you to, or do you have a time in your life or a moment in your life where you felt like you've ran out of wiggle room?
Yeah, I referred to it earlier when I really woke up to how much I was negotiating with my husband by withholding myself. And I felt like I had no choice but to change it, because I could see the impact it was having on me and on him. And I immediately course corrected, but it was so automatic. I mean, I did it so quickly. But that was a game-changing moment for me when I recognized, this relationship isn't going to move forward. There's no viability or health in this relationship until I change that practice.
How do you think being aware enough or observing yourself that you were, removing yourself, or negotiating by removing yourself, how do you think that's shaped how you show up with other people? Did you just do it with your husband, or friends?
I don't think you do it with just one person.
Right.
When you wake up to it, you wake up to it across the board. But also, I've had a few wiggle room moments. One was I had a teenage son that I was super reactive with him. And I could see that my being reactive with him, because he wasn't doing what I wanted him to do, was not getting me where I needed to go. And I needed to just shut my mouth and stop reacting. And that was also, was good for me. It was good for him. Like we all have plenty of them.
Yeah.
Wiggle room moments, as you call them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Life is full of them. Just as like an invitation. Can you take advantage of the opportunity here?
What's one piece of wisdom that you would share, or that you could share with the world, that people will remember about Sandra and her work?
I have this quote on my refrigerator, and it's love is the answer. Love is the answer. No matter what the question is, love is the answer. And, like if we could just recognize that it's a privilege to love, and whatever it takes for us to get there, what's in the way is the way, as they say, like whatever is in the way of you loving, take it, like just cultivate the practice of love. You'll never go wrong with that.
I'm in alignment with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here today. As I said at the beginning, it's an honor. You know how much I love you, and I appreciate you, and how much you've done for me. And I hope this will help, somebody else as you've helped me. Before we get out of here, is there anything else you want to say? Anything else you want to share about yourself?
Thank you. I love you. What a privilege it has been to be with you here in this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon.